The envelope was sitting on my kitchen table when I got home from my morning walk. My daughter-in-law had slipped it under my door while I was gone. I knew her handwriting. Neat, careful, the way she did everything. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a law firm's letterhead at the top and 3 paragraphs that changed everything I thought I understood about my family. My son was filing for a restraining order against me. The reason listed harassment and interference with their parental rights. I stood at that kitchen table for a long time. I didn't sit down. I didn't call anyone. I just stood there with that paper in my hands, reading it again because I couldn't make it make sense. My son. Daniel. The same boy I'd driven to baseball practice every Tuesday for 6 years. The same boy I'd sat with in the emergency room at 2 in the morning when he broke his collarbone falling off a roof he had no business being on. The same boy I'd helped move 3 times, co-signed his first car loan, and lent money to without ever once asking for a receipt. That boy was now accusing me of harassment because I had shown up to his daughter's school play without being invited. I want to tell you the story from the beginning, because the paper on my table that morning was not where it started. It started much earlier, and if I'm being honest with myself, which I try to be even when it's uncomfortable, there are things I did that I wish I'd done differently. But there are also things that happened to me that no mother should have to endure. And by the end, you'll understand why a family court judge in the state of Ohio looked at my son across a courtroom and said something that none of us in that room will ever forget. My name is Carol. I'm 67 years old. I live alone in the same house in Dayton I've lived in for 31 years, the house where Daniel grew up, where he had his birthday parties and left his cleats by the back door and brought home his first girlfriend. My husband, Ray, passed away 9 years ago from a stroke. It was sudden, a Tuesday morning, no warning, gone before the ambulance arrived. After that, it was just me and this house, and the habit of cooking for 2 that took years to break. Daniel married his wife, Stephanie, about 2 years after Ray died. I liked her at first. She was organized, sharp, had a good job in marketing. She made my son happy, and that was what mattered. I gave them a check for $12,000 as a wedding gift, money I had saved from Ray's life insurance because I wanted them to have a real start. They used it for the down payment on their house in Beaver Creek. I was glad to do it. Their daughter Maya was born 3 years later. She came into the world small and loud and perfect, and I was in the waiting room when it happened, and when Daniel came out and said, "It's a girl, Mom," I cried in a way I hadn't cried since Ray's funeral. Happy crying, the best kind. For the first year, everything was fine. I visited every Sunday. I brought dinner sometimes, a pot of chili, a roast chicken, something so Stephanie wouldn't have to cook after a long week. I held Maya while Stephanie slept. I changed diapers, washed bottles, folded tiny onesies. I wasn't trying to take over. I was trying to help. There is a difference, and I believed then. I still believe that I knew the difference. But I started to notice things, small things at first. Stephanie would seem tense when I arrived, even when I'd called ahead. Daniel would trail off mid-sentence when I asked a question about Maya's schedule. Once I reorganized the cabinet under their bathroom sink. I was babysitting. I needed to find the baby thermometer, and things were piled in there. And when Stephanie came home and saw it, she went very quiet in a way that told me she was upset but wasn't going to say so directly. I should have asked her. I should have sat down with her and said, "I can tell something's bothering you and I want to understand." I didn't. I told myself she was tired and knew Mom stressed and it would pass. That was my mistake and I own it. Instead of pulling back, I kept showing up the same way. I stocked their refrigerator when I knew they'd been traveling. I signed Maya up for a mommy and me swimming class at the Y without asking, because I'd heard Stephanie mention she wanted to look into it. I thought I was being helpful. I thought I was reading between the lines. What I was actually doing was making decisions in their home that weren't mine to make. I know that now. But here is what I also know. When I offered to pay for Maya's preschool, they accepted. When Daniel called in March of that year and said they were short on rent because the transmission on Stephanie's car had gone out, I transferred $2,000 to their account the same afternoon. When Stephanie's mother visited from out of town and they needed someone to watch Maya for a long weekend, I rearranged my own schedule, canceled a trip I'd been planning to see my sister in Tucson to be there. They never said no to any of that. The first formal conversation happened when Maya was almost 2. Daniel called, not Stephanie, and he asked if I could come over that Saturday to talk. Just talk, he said. His voice had a rehearsed quality to it, the way it used to when he was a teenager, and he'd worked himself up to asking for something he knew might be a no. I came on Saturday. Stephanie had made coffee. She sat across from me at their kitchen table with her hands folded in front of her, and Daniel sat beside her, and they told me they needed more space. More boundaries was how they put it. They asked me to call before coming over always. They asked me not to rearrange things in their home. They asked me to consult them before signing Maya up for anything or purchasing anything they'd have to manage. I said yes to everything. I meant it. For about 2 months, I was careful. I called ahead. I brought less food. I tried to ask before offering, but then Maya's spring recital at her preschool was coming up, her very first one. And Daniel mentioned it in passing on the phone, but said they were still figuring out the seating and he'd let me know. He never let me know. I waited. The day of the recital came. I drove to the preschool on my own because I could not sit in my house knowing my granddaughter was up on a little stage in a paper butterfly costume and I was not there. I did not sit with Daniel and Stephanie. I sat in the back row. I did not approach them. I watched Maya wave her arms like a butterfly to a song I didn't know, and I cried again, the good kind, the same way I had in that hospital waiting room. When it was over, I slipped out before they reached the back of the room. But Stephanie had seen me, and that was apparently the last straw. 3 weeks later, the letter arrived. I hired an attorney. Her name was Janet Park, and she had an office on Brown Street and a directness I appreciated because I had no room left in my life for soft language. I handed her the letter across her desk and watched her read it. When she looked up, she said, "You're telling me your son is seeking a restraining order because you attended a school event in a public building and didn't interact with them." That's what the letter says. And there's no history of threats, no property damage, no verbal altercations. No, none of that. Janet put the letter down. Then we'll be fine. I wish I had felt as certain as she sounded. I went home that night and I sat in the chair by the window where Ray used to read, and I thought about what I had done wrong. Not just the preschool recital. All of it. I had pushed when I should have listened. I had helped in ways that made people feel managed instead of loved. I had confused being needed with being present. Those were real failures, and I sat with them. But I had never threatened anyone. I had never raised my voice. I had never turned up to make a scene. I had brought casseroles and birthday presents and 20 years of myself, and whatever mistakes I had made, they were the mistakes of someone who loved too loudly, not someone who meant harm. The weeks before the hearing were the loneliest of my life. My sister called from Tucson every few days. My friend Beverly from church brought me soup and didn't make me talk if I didn't want to. But mostly I sat with it alone, which is how certain kinds of pain have to be processed. What kept me going was Maya. While the legal process moved forward, I wrote her letters. Not to use in court, just for her. I had always sent her little notes tucked into cards, drawings I made on index cards, short sentences about what I loved about her. After the restraining order was filed, I couldn't deliver them, so I kept them. I bought a small wooden box at a craft store and painted it pale yellow, her favorite color, and I put each letter in it as I wrote it. There were 31 letters in that box by the time we went to court. I didn't send them to her. I didn't have them filed in court. I just kept writing them in the evenings because it was the one thing I could do that felt true. The hearing was on a Wednesday in late October. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled, fluorescent lights, the kind of room that made everything feel procedural and gray. Daniel arrived with Stephanie and their attorney. He did not look at me when he sat down. Stephanie looked at the table. I sat beside Janet and kept my hands in my lap and tried to breathe. Their attorney made the case that I had repeatedly violated their requests for space. He listed the preschool recital. He listed the bathroom cabinet. He listed the swim class enrollment, the unannounced visits in the first year of Maya's life, a moment at Maya's second birthday party, when I had, apparently, stepped in to help cut the cake without being asked. He made it sound like a pattern of control. From a certain angle, in a certain light, I could see how it looked that way. When Janet spoke, she was methodical. She pointed out that not one of the incidents listed involved a threat, a raised voice, or any behavior that would justify a restraining order under Ohio law. She pointed out that I had attended a public school event in a public building and had not approached, spoken to, or disturbed anyone. She pointed out that the court had a high bar for granting the order sought, and that the evidence did not come close to clearing it. Then the judge spoke. He was a man in his late 50s, gray-haired with reading glasses. He kept pushing up his nose. He had been quiet through most of both presentations. He looked at the documents for a long moment before he spoke, and when he did, he addressed my son directly. He said, "I've reviewed this filing carefully, and I want to be honest with you, because I think that's more useful than giving you the answer you came here for. What I see in this record is a mother who made errors in judgment about boundaries. I also see those errors were never accompanied by malice, threats, or any behavior that endangers your family. What I do not see is any basis for the legal remedy you're requesting. A restraining order is a serious instrument. It is not a tool for resolving family friction." He paused. He looked at both my son and Stephanie, then he said, "Your mother did not stalk you. She sat in the back of a school auditorium to watch her grandchild perform. If that is the version of her you want your daughter to grow up believing, I would encourage you to think carefully about what you're teaching her." He denied the motion. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that because people expect you to feel triumphant when the judge rules in your favor. What I felt was exhausted and sad and relieved in a way that had nothing to do with winning. I felt relieved because it was over, because someone in an official capacity had said, plainly and without theater, that I was not a monster. Daniel left the courtroom without speaking to me. Stephanie followed him. Their attorney followed her. Janet touched my arm and said, "You okay?" I said. "I think so." I meant it mostly. What happened next, no one planned. About 6 weeks after the hearing, I was home on a Saturday morning making oatmeal when my phone rang. It wasn't a number I recognized. I almost didn't answer. It was Maya. She was 5, so the conversation was not sophisticated. She told me she missed me. She told me she still had the index card I'd drawn for her, a little rabbit with a bow tie taped to the wall above her bed. She told me she had a loose tooth. I sat down on the kitchen floor because my knees stopped working properly, and I talked to her for 11 minutes about her tooth and her rabbit drawing and whether she thought the tooth fairy left quarters or dollars. She was confident. Dollars. At the end she said, "Grandma Carol, I told Daddy I was going to call you. He said okay." I held the phone for a long time after she hung up. It was not a resolution. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful apology from my son, no moment where Stephanie told me she had been wrong. None of that happened. What happened was slower and smaller and more real than any of that. Daniel texted me 2 weeks later and asked if I wanted to come to Maya's birthday dinner. Just dinner, just the 4 of us. I said yes. I called ahead. I brought a gift I had asked about first. I didn't reorganize anything. It was awkward. It was stilted. There were silences that nobody knew how to fill. But Maya sat next to me at the table and told me everything about her kindergarten class with the specific, exhaustive intensity that 5-year-olds bring to the subjects they care about. And at some point I looked across the table and Daniel was watching her and watching me, and something in his face was different from what it had been in that courtroom. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the beginning of something. I drove home that night through the flat, dark streets of Dayton, past the Kroger where I'd bought Daniel's school lunches for 12 years, past the part where Ray used to take him to feed ducks. I thought about all the things I would do differently if I could. I would have listened more and assumed less. I would have asked before doing. I would have understood sooner that helping someone the way you want to help them, rather than the way they need to be helped, is not really help at all. But I also thought about that wooden box with 31 letters in it, painted pale yellow, sitting on my bedroom dresser. I thought about a 5-year-old girl who had taped a rabbit drawing to her wall and picked up a phone and called me. Some things cannot be undone. Mistakes, rifts, years that pass, with too much distance and not enough grace. But some things can be repaired, slowly, imperfectly, the way you repair anything that matters, carefully, with both hands, and with enough patience to let it take the time it takes. I still have the wooden box. I still add to it. Someday when Maya is old enough, I will give it to her, not as evidence, not as proof of anything. Just as the record of all the ordinary Saturdays when I sat at my kitchen table and thought about her and wanted her to know. I still think about the drive home from that courthouse. The streets looked the same as they always had. The Kroger, the park, the turn onto my road, but I felt like I was seeing them from a different altitude somehow. Like something had shifted just enough to change the angle. What I keep coming back to is this. Nothing that happened to me was random. Every moment in that courtroom was the result of a long chain of choices. Mine, Daniel's, Stephanie's, stretching back years. I had helped when I should have asked. I had assumed when I should have listened. And they had let resentment build in silence instead of saying the hard thing early, when it still could have been said gently. All of us contributed to what that room became. That is not a comfortable thing to admit, but it is the true thing. I think about what it actually took to sit in that courthouse and not fall apart. Not the legal part. Janet handled that. I mean the part where you have to look at your own son across a fluorescent-lit room and understand that he genuinely believes he is protecting his family from you. That requires something more than just being right. It requires the kind of clarity that only comes when you've spent enough quiet evenings alone asking yourself hard questions and not flinching from the answers. I had to understand where I had failed before I could stand behind what I hadn't. That is its own kind of wisdom, and it is not given to you. You have to earn it through exactly the kind of pain I was in. What I know now, that I did not fully know before, good intentions are not enough. Loving someone does not automatically mean you understand what they need from you. I loved Daniel and Maya with everything I had, and I still made choices that felt like intrusion to people I never wanted to crowd. The gap between what we mean and what we do. That is where relationships break. Closing that gap requires honesty with yourself first, before anyone else. And then there is the matter of not giving up. There were weeks during that process when I almost did. When I thought, let them have their distance, let them have whatever version of me they need to be angry at. I am too tired for this. But I kept writing Maya's letters. I kept showing up to my own life. I kept choosing every single day to remain the person I wanted her to remember. Not because I was sure it would work, but because the alternative was disappearing, and I had not come this far to disappear. When Maya called me from her father's kitchen, 11 minutes about a loose tooth and a rabbit drawing, I understood something I couldn't have understood before all of it. She had held on to me not because I was perfect, because I had stayed. That yellow wooden box is still on my dresser. I will give it to her someday, not as proof of anything, just as the record of someone who loved her without conditions and had the stubbornness to keep going until she could say so again.